Oh, good morning and welcome to this multi-location meeting of the Cabinet Scrutiny Committee on the 18th of March 2024. I am Councillor Phil Rogers and I will be chairing this meeting. Please could you ensure that your phones are switched to silent for the duration of the meeting? And in addition, when asked to raise your hand, if members who are virtually viewing this meeting could raise your electronic hand, and for members in the chamber, just raise your hands. On to agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Can I ask, has anybody got any declarations of interest?
Yes, I have, Chair. Oh, sorry.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Hill. Anybody else? Okay, we'll move along then. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hill. Declaration.
I'm just going to make a prejudicial declaration and leave the room when it comes up on the
What's agenda item? Or just
agenda item 5. There's 5, isn't it?
Thank you, Councillor Hill. Okay. We'll move along then to agenda item 3, pre-decision scrutiny. We're going to move to the Cabinet Board agenda, and we have decided to scrutinise items 5 and 9 of the Cabinet agenda. Agenda item 5, council tax premium on long-term empty dwellings and second homes. These are listed on pages 3 to 34 of the agenda pack. Officers, would you like to add anything additional to the report?
No, thank you, Chair. We'll go straight to questions, please. Diolch.
Thank you, Hugh. We'll move to members' questions next. I have a few on the list already, and we'll start off with Councillor Sean Percy, please.
Diolch, thank you. So just in terms of the proposals here to bring long-term empty properties in particular back into use, I, very much supportive of the policy intent there. I think, given the pressure we've got on housing demand, I think it's going to play a really important part. There's quite a lot of long-term empty properties in the county. And I think in terms of the 200% charges proposed, I think that is going to work in terms of encouraging people who own those properties to move in or sell them on. So I think that I'm quite happy with. But where I do have a bit of a concern is in terms of what the picture looks like for buyers. And I think obviously for this policy to work, we need people to sell the properties or offer them for sale, and we need people to buy them to get them back into use. And my concerns around the sort of complicated picture of exemptions that we've got for council tax at the moment. And we have some in place now, as I'm saying, that allow people to claim an exemption from council tax entirely for up to 6 months for an unfurnished and unoccupied property. But it's a bit of a lottery, so it depends whether the previous owner has used that exemption or not. So if you're buying a property now, you may get 6 months council tax free if you don't move straight in. So if you want to do some messy renovation works, or you may not. It just depends what the previous owner's done, which is a bit of an odd situation. But if we go ahead with this policy, we're actually going to make that lottery even worse, because we're going to have a situation where some people would get 6 months free council tax if they hadn't moved in and would renovate in. Then they'd get 6 months at 100% council tax and then 200% thereafter. Other people would get 6 months at 100% council tax and then 200% thereafter. So we'd actually be disincentivizing people to purchase a house that's been long-term empty. It would be more tax beneficial to buy a house that has previously been occupied, even if they need the same amount of renovation work to bring them up to standard. So I just wondered what we have considered and what we might be willing to consider to sort of make that seem a little bit fairer, because I'm just very conscious that for this to really work, it certainly shouldn't be less advantageous for a buyer to buy an empty property than it is a property that's currently occupied. So I'll be really interested if officers have got any, or cabinet members, any comments on how they might consider that position moving forward. Diolch.
Thank you, Councillor Percy. I'll bring you in on this one, please.
Yep, thank you very much, Chair. So I think I'll start and I'll probably hand over to my colleague Anne Hinders on the call. So in terms of that lottery issue around the 6 months exemption, well, that'll be no different going forward than it is now. If you purchase a property now and somebody has already used the exemption and you don't get it, and that'll be the same going forward. What we've done in terms of this policy is introduced this sort of 6 months concession really, where if somebody buys a property that's uninhabitable, they will have 6 months of council tax at 100%. In order to be able to do the house up to get it habitable. So basically, again, no difference to at the moment. If you buy a house where someone's used the exemption to be paying council tax at 100%, that would be the situation going forward. So I would have thought within 6 months, somebody should be able to get a house that's habitable and able to live in. But I'll probably hand over to Anne now. We'll probably want to say a bit more, Chair. So thank you.
Thank you. Anne, would you like to come in, please?
Yeah, the issue around exemptions is quite a complicated issue because there are different exemptions according to the circumstances of the person who is residing in the property. So currently we have a lot of customers who are looking at potential properties to buy who contact us to establish whether or not 100% charge would kick in immediately upon purchase, or whether they would be entitled to a different exemption or discount on that property. Some properties which are classed as unoccupied have an exemption which won't affect the premium. So for example, if a person is deceased in a care home, if those properties are still furnished, then even though the property is unoccupied, when a person buys it, they will benefit from a 6 months exemption, or if that property needs work, a 12 months exemption. Those are statutory discounts and exemptions in law, so we've got no control over those. What we did listen to with the consultation was that people were concerned about purchasing a property that required substantial works to bring it up to a habitable condition. And if that exemption had expired, they would immediately go into the 200% premium, which is why we introduced that 6 months leeway, if you like, where they would only pay the 100% and the premium would only kick in after a further 100%. Looking at other local authorities, just to give you a flavour, there aren't any other local authorities in our area. So Rhondda Cynon, Swansea, Bridgend, Carmarthen, none of them had introduced that 6 months additional exemption that we're looking at. The people in those authorities will have the premiums immediately upon purchase if the other exemptions have been expired.
Many thanks, Anne. Councillor Percy?
Yeah, if I could come back, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, if I can go ahead, Councillor Percy.
Great. No, thanks both for responses. I think there's sort of a couple of follow-up points, really. I think it's important to recognise that not all long-term empty properties are uninhabitable. We're actually talking here about properties that have been empty for a year or more, which is quite common. And I've been house hunting recently, and it's the vast majority of the properties I viewed have been empty for over a year, and they're all livable. They're not falling to pieces, but they're houses that are perhaps unattractive to a family to move in because the kitchen needs upgrading, the bathroom needs upgrading. They're not in great decorative condition. There may be some minor repairs to carry out, and I'm sort of concerned really that the policy doesn't really capture those sorts of properties, which I think make up quite the bulk of the properties that fall into this category. And the exemption in place is only for uninhabitable major works, which I don't think captures that. And I also kind of dispute the fact that the situation will be the same, because it will be worse under the new policy in terms of that lottery, because the gap gets wider in terms of the potential tax people might be paying. But just in terms of what we could do, obviously you mentioned, Anne, that the current exemptions that are set out are statutory, but we do have some flexibility ourselves, don't we, to set and change exemptions. And it strikes me that the obvious thing to do is for that 6 months exemption for unfurnished and occupied should reset when the house is sold. And then it's just really clear for everybody, if they're buying a house, that what the council tax situation will be, and that incentive or disincentive is exactly the same across the board. That feels like a common sense thing to do. Is that something we could do under the sort of the rules and legislation that we work in?
Thank you, Councillor Percy. I'll bring Councillor Hurley back in first, please.
No, it was just to add one thing, and I hope that the scheme is still running with the Welsh Gov, where you can get, long-term properties which have been registered with the council for over 12 months can qualify for a grant up to £25,000 to help improve energy efficiency and to make them safe to live in. So that should be, if we can help perhaps guide people towards that, then that might be a big incentive to bring these properties back into use. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hurley. Hugh?
Yeah, that houses, that interest-free loan scheme is still up and running from the Welsh Government, Councillor Hurley. I think Anne will probably want to come back on that point on the 6 months, Chair.
Lovely, thanks, Hugh. Anne, if you can come back in then, please.
With regards to the 6 months, I think if you give everybody a 6-month leeway, then there will be people who will deliberately perhaps not occupy that property in order to benefit from an additional 6 months exemption from the premium. But we are talking about a very small number of people who perhaps are in a property or renting a property who wouldn't immediately move into another property that's been purchased, or own a property and have purchased another property and haven't quite moved in because they haven't quite sold their property. These people, most people, when they buy a house, will move from one house straight into another house. They won't go elsewhere in order to do the works up. And what we must remember is that there are people who do look to improve houses, who do live in those houses and do the work whilst they're in those properties. So whilst we have got the discretion to introduce a 6 months exemption on a premium on a property that doesn't require major works outstanding, I don't think I feel that won't encourage people to move in straight away. It'll encourage people to delay moving in order to avoid the premium. Hugh, I don't know whether there's something that we discussed this morning that you want to bring in there.
No, I think you've covered it, Anne. Thanks. I think we're okay. Thank you.
Thank you both. Councillor Percy, would you like to come back final time?
Yeah, I'll make just to sum up. I appreciate what you're saying there, Anne, in terms of what that may or may not encourage people to do. I think there's 2 points there. I think we're not really talking about the people that are going to move straight in, because we're talking about the people that aren't going to. Because the people that move straight in are not worried about the exemption. They'll just pay their council tax as they're entitled to and as they're assessed. So we're talking about those other people that either can't afford to buy a house that's ready to move into, or in a privileged position to be renovating properties. So we're talking about those people specifically. And I think the point you mentioned about introducing an exemption, the point I'm making is the exemption exists now. It's just a lottery as to whether you get it or not. So there is an exemption there that some people will benefit from for an unfurnished, unoccupied property for 6 months, but it is completely random and a complete lottery as to whether or not they get it. And I think the point I'm making is that should be more uniform, so that if somebody's being really cost conscious, which they might be, looking at properties to buy, if they did their work, if they did their digging, if they had 6-12 months work to do before that property was suitable to be sold on or moved into, and it wasn't classed as major structural works, which is actually quite a high bar to get to, then if they were being really cost conscious, they could save a few £1,000s potentially, depending on the council tax band of the property, by buying an occupied property than buying an unoccupied property. And I think that's the point I'm trying to get across, is that there's not really a lot of logic in the current system, and I think there's room to make that more logical and more fair.
Thank you, Councillor Percy. I think they noted it though. I think we've exhausted the answers from there. Thank you. Next up, please, I have Councillor Rob Jones, please.
Excuse me. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Observation really in relation to the consultation. And I know we throw it open for anyone to partake in the consultation, but it seems heavily biased towards those that will be affected by this. And in particular, those that have second homes that rent them out. There was one that stuck out in the Avon Valley. They rent it out as an Airbnb, and they're concerned that with the rise of a second home, which as an Airbnb they're running as a business, how that will affect increased costs to have the knock-on effect of those that rent the property or hire the property. The consultation is biased. The majority of the people that have responded has been the ones that have expressed concerns about the implementation here. I am in support of the policy, and I think it's right that we need to bring these homes back into usage. And there is a little tangent which I made, Chair. As councillors, very often we get complaints from neighbours of empty properties that are empty for a variety of reasons, and we are prohibited, and I've got to be honest, Anne Hinder is extremely helpful whenever I've had issues regarding council tax, and follow that up. I'm always grateful for the interaction I get with Anne, but she's tied with data protection of passing that information on for us to do any further inquiries. But I know we've got an empty properties officer, and I would look to strengthen the relationship between members asking for information about empty properties and that being passed expeditiously to the empty properties officer to get him into contact to make sure that there are no neighbour problems and disputes, which is another area that we could look to strengthen to bring these properties back in. But I am concerned about the consultation and its bias. It borders on being a consultation to criticising the council by the people that will be directly affected, and it's how we take cognizance of that overwhelming response of those that are objecting for what they believe valid reasons as to how it will affect them. Those are my concerns. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Can I bring Anne back in on this one, please?
Yeah, we did write to each individual who owned a second home or a long-term empty property. So we did directly mail 1,700 people in relation to the consultation. However, the majority of responses came back from people who didn't own long-term empties and second homes, which was quite surprising because I would have thought that the majority of people who were going to be subject to a premium would have had some sort of opinion on the proposals. But just as a flavour for other local authorities, I did a bit of research this morning, and I think members were concerned that perhaps the responses were quite low in comparison. However, Swansea wrote to just over 4,200 homeowners, and they only received 567 responses on their consultation. Rhondda and Taff, 2,700, and they had 311 responses. Bridgend wrote to 772 and had 167 responses. So we actually had the highest number of responses compared to the number of people we directly wrote to. However, as I say, the majority of respondents weren't second home and long-term empty owners.
Thank you, Anne. Yeah, I think the nature of this consultation is it's going to be biased to, because you write into particularly people who it's going to affect. And Councillor Jones, would you like to come back in?
Yeah, thank you, Anne. That's very interesting stats and information, and clarifies why the consultation is so biased towards that. So I'm grateful for that information. But I would still ask that officers take cognizance of the relationship between Anne Hinder's office and her role, and making sure that properties that are questioned by members are passed to the empty properties officer to expedite matters where we as members have problems with empty properties over a long period of time. This may go to alleviate that, but we don't know if we don't try. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. I'll bring Hugh back in a second, please.
Yeah, we'll certainly take that on board, Councillor Jones, and I'll take that up with Anne outside of the meeting and with colleagues. Thank you.
Many thanks, Hugh. Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Tim Bowen, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think most of my questions have been asked in some form, but I just asked one quick question. When people open up an Airbnb, do they have to register that property as an Airbnb with the council?
If I can bring Anne back in on that one. Thank you, Councillor Bowen.
What they have to do is contact the Valuation Office Agency, because they are the people that determine whether a property falls into the council tax list or the business rates list. Or normally for the first year of trading, the property will be in the council tax list, because the Valuation Office requires certain criteria to be met, which is that the property has to be available for let for 244 days, I think it is, in a year, and actually let for 182. So generally what happens, it'll come into the council tax listing. After a year, the valuation office will have the data available then to determine whether it's met that criteria, and then it'll either put it back into the business rates listing or it'll remain in the council tax listing, depending on the number of nights it's been let out.
Oh,
Okay.
thank you for that. That's great. Councillor Bowen?
Just come back quickly. Just for that again. Do we get any properties that go out to Airbnb but don't actually register?
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Anne?
No, every property that we've got on our listing will either fall into council tax or business rates. So it won't slip through the net, because it'll either be in the council tax list or the business rates list. However, as a council tax officer, I wouldn't know if that property had been converted into an Airbnb unless we were advised.
Right.
It would be in the taxpayer's interest to go into the business rates list, because generally, if you go into the business rates list, you can get small business rates relief and you don't end up paying an awful lot of business rates, whereas the council tax is generally greater than what they would pay in business rates.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Next up, I have Councillor Charlotte Galsworthy, please.
No, all mine's been answered, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Galsworthy. Next along, Councillor Suzanne Paddison, please.
Thank you, Chair. My comments were mostly along the lines of what Councillor Jones said about the biasness of the consultation. So I just hope that officers and cabinet members take that on board. I am broadly in favour of anything that will restore homes from empty properties. You know, as a county borough, we are not building new homes to the level that we should be. However, I think Councillor Pusey is very he's spot on there. It has to be fair. Please try and make sure that if there is a rule, it applies to everyone, because it can't. I would not be in favour of anything that was deemed or perceived to be a bit of luck. So those are my comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Paddison. I'm sure they've taken that on board, and having spoken earlier this morning with some of them, that I'm sure they're going to look at it every case, to be honest. Thank you very much. Anybody else want to comment on that? Councillor Hurley again, please.
Apologies, Chair. Yeah, it's only just additional information for members again. I think Councillor Jones mentioned data protection and finding out ownership. You can go on Land Reg and you can pull a title register up for £3, and that's public information. So if they want to be proactive in perhaps helping in finding and contacting properties. The other one is you can check on businesses as well. So if you go on the BOA site, if you put a postcode in, then that'll pull you up businesses as well. So if there's an Airbnb that is acting as a business, then you can get that information as well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that, Councillor Hurley. I didn't know that. Thank you very much. Yeah. Any other questions on that, please? Okay. Look, the recommendation is listed on page 12 of the Cabinet Agenda Pack. I'm happy to propose it. Can I have a seconder, please?
Happy second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Can members please indicate if they wish to abstain?
See no abstentions, Chair.
Thank you, Alison. Members, if you do not indicate to the contrary, then I will take it that this decision is supported to Cabinet.
I can see no indications to the contrary, Chair. The recommendation is supported to Cabinet.
Many thanks, Alison. We move back to the scrutiny agenda. Agenda item 4, urgent items. You'll be glad to hear I have no urgent items again today. Sorry, it's so urgent. I've just been informed we got an urgent item. Okay, it's hot off the press. Can I bring in Nicola Pierce, please?
Thank you, Chair. Members will be aware that we talked about the capital programme last week in Cabinet, and there were a number of questions raised in that meeting, one of which related to the money that was proposed to be spent on the PDR. Now, I advised members that the money that was proposed to be spent related to an area of the PDR around the works entrance site in Margam. That was inaccurate, I'm afraid. I did write to the chair and to the members who raised the issue in the meeting. The actual area of the PDR that is subject to those improvement works and repairs relates to the stretch between the hospital and the Magistrates' Court. So just for clarity, I'd like to go on record to indicate that was a mistake on my behalf so that the minutes can be rectified. Thank you, Chair.
Many thanks, Nicola. That is duly recorded, and we'll move on from there. Thank you. Agenda item 5, access to meetings. To resolve to exclude the public from the following item, pursuant of section 100A, paragraphs 4 and 5 of the Local Government Act 1972, and the relevant exempt paragraphs of Part 4 of Schedule 12A of the above Act. I propose, can I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Goldsworthy. Are there any abstentions?
See no abstentions, Chair.
Thank you, Alison. If you do not indicate to the contrary, I will take it that this item is approved and we will move into private. Can we stop the recording, please?